At the end of the 19th century, America glittered with confidence. Railroads stretched across the land, factories roared day and night, and fortunes appeared almost overnight. With this sudden wealth came a desire to display it, not quietly, but boldly. Across cities and countryside rose enormous mansions, stone palaces with marble staircases, ballrooms lit by chandeliers, and gardens shaped by hired hands who worked year-round. These homes were not built simply to live in. They were built to prove something: that their owners had arrived at the top of a new American hierarchy. Inside these mansions, life unfolded like a carefully staged performance. Breakfasts were served by servants in silence. Evenings were filled with orchestras and formal dances, and guests wandered through rooms decorated with imported tapestries and gold leaf ceilings. Every hallway whispered excess. Some homes had dozens of bedrooms, even though only a handful were ever used. Others contained private theaters, indoor swimming pools, and libraries that were more decorative than practical. The wealth seemed endless, solid, permanent, etched into stone and iron. Behind these walls lived families whose names dominated newspapers and business ledgers. Industrialists, railroad tycoons, and financiers used these estates to secure social status as much as comfort. A grand mansion could open doors to elite circles, political influence, and prestigious marriages. These houses became symbols of power, announcing that old European aristocracy had an American counterpart. But what looked like stability was often fragile, built on markets that could turn without warning. When financial crisis struck, the illusion shattered. Economic crashes wiped out fortunes in months. Industries declined, railroads failed, and inheritance divided wealth thinner with every generation. At the same time, property taxes rose, servants became harder to afford, and public attitudes toward extreme wealth began to change. What once symbolized success now seemed excessive, even embarrassing. The mansions, designed for endless money, became financial traps. American society was changing too. Smaller families, urban living, and modern conveniences made vast estates unnecessary. Younger generations preferred apartments, hotels, or modern homes that were easier to maintain. Many heirs simply walked away, leaving rooms sealed, furniture untouched, and curtains slowly fading in the sun. Without constant care, roofs leaked, pipes burst, and nature began reclaiming what wealth had once claimed from it. Years passed, and silence settled in. Grand staircases collected dust. Ballrooms echoed only with wind. Ivy climbed stone walls. Trees cracked foundations, and animals moved into spaces once meant for elegance. Some mansions were stripped for materials, others burned, and many simply collapsed under their own weight. What had taken years of labor and unimaginable money to build vanished quietly, almost unnoticed. Today, these ruins stand as reminders, not just of lost wealth, but of how quickly certainty can decay. The Gilded Age promised permanence through excess, yet left behind empty shells. In broken windows and crumbling towers, there is a story America rarely tells. The story of ambition that reached too high, believed too strongly in its own power, and forgot that even stone palaces are temporary. The last decades of the 19th century arrived like a storm. America had never seen money move so fast or grow so large. Railroads stitched the continent together. Steel poured from factories. Oil surged from the ground. And banks multiplied fortunes with a speed that felt almost unreal. Men who had grown up in modest homes suddenly controlled industries that powered the entire nation. Wealth no longer accumulated slowly over generations. It exploded, and the people who possessed it were often unprepared for how visible, how overwhelming it would become. With that wealth came a hunger, not just to enjoy it, but to make it undeniable. Money sitting in ledgers or locked in vaults was invisible. And invisibility felt dangerous in a society obsessed with progress and competition. A mansion solved that problem. Rising from city streets or perched on rolling hills, these enormous homes announced success from miles away. They were physical proof that their owners had conquered the chaos of industrial America and turned it into personal triumph. These houses were built larger than necessity demanded. Families that needed only a few rooms commissioned estates with 50 or 60. Corridors stretched endlessly, staircases split and rejoined like rivers, and ceilings soared far above human scale. The excess was intentional. Size itself became a language, speaking of dominance, security, and permanence in an era where fortunes could appear overnight and disappear just as quickly. The design of these mansions drew heavily from Europe, because Europe still represented legitimacy. American wealth was new, sometimes viewed as crude or unstable, and the fastest way to disguise that insecurity was imitation. Architects were instructed to recreate French châteaux, Italian palazzos, and English country houses. Imported marble crossed oceans. Carved wood traveled thousands of miles, and craftsmen were brought in to reproduce old-world luxury on American soil. These buildings were meant to suggest that this wealth was not temporary, not accidental, but as refined and enduring as any royal dynasty. Yet beneath the elegance lay anxiety. Many of these industrial fortunes were built in brutal conditions, long hours, dangerous labor, child workers, and polluted cities. Mansions became a kind of shield, separating wealth from the world that produced it. Behind gates and manicured gardens, owners could escape the smoke and noise of their own factories. The distance between mansion and mill mirrored the growing divide between rich and poor, turning architecture into a boundary line. Social competition intensified the obsession. If one tycoon built a grand house, another felt compelled to build a grander one. Ballrooms expanded, guest lists grew longer, and dinner parties became strategic displays rather than simple gatherings. A mansion was not merely a home, it was a stage. Every room was designed to impress visitors, intimidate rivals, and secure a place at the top of an unstable social ladder. To lack such a residence was to risk being forgotten. There was also a belief, quiet but powerful, that these buildings could outlast time itself. Industrial America was unpredictable, but stone walls and iron beams felt solid, eternal. Mansions were built as monuments to success, meant to anchor a family name forever. They stood as declarations that wealth had finally been conquered, shaped, and made permanent. In the glow of that explosive prosperity, few could imagine that the very speed which created these palaces would one day make them obsolete. Stepping inside a Gilded Age mansion was like entering a world carefully separated from ordinary time. The doors closed. The noise of the city faded, and life slowed into a ritual of luxury that most Americans could scarcely imagine. Every detail of daily existence was shaped to emphasize comfort, control, and distinction. These homes were not just places to live. They were environments designed to make wealth feel natural, effortless, and eternal. Mornings began quietly, but never simply. Servants moved through corridors long before the household woke, lighting fires, polishing silver, and preparing elaborate breakfasts that appeared as if by magic. Bells rang from bedrooms, summoning maids who dressed children, laid out clothing, and adjusted curtains to let in just the right amount of light. The owners rarely entered kitchens or laundry rooms. Entire wings of the mansion existed solely to keep the machinery of comfort invisible. Luxury depended on distance between those who enjoyed it and those who made it possible. The rooms themselves were theatrical. Dining rooms glowed with candlelight, reflecting off crystal and gold-trimmed china. Libraries were lined with leather, bound books chosen as much for appearance as for reading. Parlors displayed imported furniture arranged to impress guests rather than invite relaxation. Even the air felt different, warmed by fireplaces, scented with flowers, and filtered through heavy drapery. Nothing in these spaces was accidental. Comfort was engineered, measured, and refined. Afternoons unfolded according to social rhythm. Some hours were devoted to correspondence, music practice, or quiet walks through private gardens, but much of the day revolved around preparing for company. Guests arrived constantly. Neighbors of equal status, politicians, business partners, and social rivals. Conversation was polite but strategic. Every invitation extended or withheld carried meaning. The mansion itself became a silent participant, reinforcing its owner's importance simply by existing. Evenings were when these homes truly came alive. Formal dinners stretched for hours, with multiple courses served by uniformed staff, who moved in perfect synchronization. Music drifted through halls as orchestras played in ballrooms designed for echo and spectacle. Dresses swept across polished floors, and laughter bounced beneath painted ceilings. Yet beneath the elegance lay exhaustion. Maintaining such grandeur required constant performance. Luxury was not restful, it was demanding. Daily life also followed strict hierarchies. Servants lived almost parallel lives within the same walls, using hidden staircases and narrow hallways to avoid being seen. Their presence was essential but deliberately unnoticed. This separation preserved the illusion that wealth created ease, not labor. The mansion functioned like a machine, precise, relentless, and dependent on human effort, hidden behind polished surfaces. For children growing up in these homes, luxury shaped identity early. They learned manners before independence, appearances before intimacy. Rooms were large, but affection could feel distant. The scale of the house often swallowed personal connection, replacing warmth with formality. Even family life became part of the display, carefully managed to match the expectations attached to the name engraved on the gate. Over time, this extreme comfort became strangely isolating. Surrounded by beauty and service, life could feel insulated from reality. The outside world, with its economic swings, labor unrest, and social change, seemed far away, muffled by stone walls and manicured lawns. Inside these mansions, wealth felt permanent, controlled, and unquestionable. The daily routines reinforced that belief, wrapping the inhabitants in luxury, so complete that it became difficult to imagine life any other way. Behind every Gilded Age mansion stood a family determined to transform sudden wealth into lasting importance. Money alone was not enough. In a society that still measured prestige by lineage, culture, and reputation, newly rich families felt an urgent need to prove they belonged at the top. The mansion became their most powerful tool, a visible declaration that their success was not temporary luck, but the foundation of a dynasty. Many of these families came from modest or even poor beginnings. Fathers had worked their way up through factories, railroads, oil fields, or banks, carrying with them a deep awareness of how fragile success could be. That fear shaped their ambitions. They did not want to be remembered as businessmen who made money. They wanted to be remembered as families who mattered. The mansion, massive and immovable, seemed like a way to anchor a family name in history. Social ambition governed daily decisions. Who was invited to dinner? Which charities were supported? Where children were educated? All were calculated steps toward acceptance by elite society. The home itself functioned as a social weapon. Grand reception rooms hosted gatherings designed to impress established families, politicians, and cultural figures. Every event was carefully staged to suggest refinement rather than raw wealth, taste rather than excess, even when excess filled every corner. Marriage became another strategy. Sons and daughters were often encouraged to marry into families with social standing, even if their fortunes were smaller. These alliances blended money with pedigree, creating a sense of legitimacy that business success alone could not provide. Balls and formal dinners held within the mansion were not just entertainment. They were opportunities to display eligible heirs beneath glittering chandeliers, surrounded by symbols of stability and power. Women in these families played a crucial role in shaping social identity. While men focused on business empires, women managed the public face of the household. They organized events, oversaw decor, patronized the arts, and enforced strict codes of etiquette. Their success was measured not in profit, but in invitations received, reputations polished, and doors opened. A well-run mansion could elevate a family faster than any financial deal. Children were raised with the weight of expectation pressing down early. Tutors, music lessons, and European travel were meant to cultivate sophistication. They were taught how to speak, dress, and behave in ways that matched the grandeur of their surroundings. The mansion itself became a classroom, silently instructing them that they were different, elevated, destined for influence. Individual desires were often secondary to the image the family needed to project. Yet beneath the ambition lay tension. Many families lived with the constant fear of slipping back into obscurity. Wealth had come quickly, and that made it feel unstable. The mansion, for all its beauty, was also a reminder of what had to be maintained. Every cracked relationship, failed marriage, or business setback threatened not just finances, but social standing. The house that symbolized success also magnified vulnerability. These families believed they were building something permanent. Names that would endure, traditions that would last generations. Their social ambitions were woven into the walls, etched into staircases, and carved above doorways. At the height of the Gilded Age, it seemed natural to assume that wealth, once achieved, could secure immortality. Few could imagine that the same ambitions that built these mansions would one day leave them standing empty, stripped of the families who once believed they would never fade. The wealth that built Gilded Age mansions felt unstoppable, but it rested on ground far less solid than stone walls suggested. Beneath the elegance and confidence lay an economy driven by speculation, debt, and rapid expansion. Fortunes rose not gradually, but in dramatic leaps, tied to railroads, steel, banking, and markets that could shift overnight. When those shifts came, they came without mercy. Economic crashes arrived like sudden earthquakes. The Panic of 1873, the Panic of 1893, and later financial collapses rippled through industries that had seemed invincible. Railroads went bankrupt, banks failed, and investments once considered safe evaporated. Families who had measured their wealth in millions discovered that much of it existed only on paper. Income streams dried up, but the mansions remained, demanding constant upkeep regardless of shrinking fortunes. These houses were enormously expensive to maintain. Heating dozens of rooms, repairing roofs, caring for gardens, and paying large domestic staffs required steady cash flow. When profits fell, the mansion did not adjust. It consumed money at the same relentless pace, turning from a symbol of success into a financial burden. Selling was rarely easy. The houses were too large, too costly, and too tied to personal identity to attract buyers. At the same time, government policies began to change. Property taxes increased as cities expanded and public infrastructure demanded funding. Later, inheritance taxes and income taxes struck at the very foundation of dynastic wealth. Passing a fortune to the next generation became complicated and expensive. Each generation received less than the one before, divided among multiple heirs, and reduced by taxes that earlier tycoons had never faced. Fortunes also suffered from mismanagement and generational distance. The men who built wealth often understood the industries that sustained it. Their children and grandchildren did not always share that knowledge or discipline. Some spent freely, assuming money would continue to appear as it always had. Others invested poorly or clung to declining industries, while the economy modernized around them. Wealth that had once felt permanent quietly eroded. Changing markets accelerated the decline. New technologies replaced old ones. Monopolies were challenged, and public opinion turned against extreme concentrations of wealth. Antitrust laws and regulation weakened empires that had once dominated entire sectors. The same aggressive capitalism that had created massive fortunes now worked against them, favoring flexibility over size and innovation over inheritance. As income shrank and expenses grew, families faced uncomfortable choices. Staff were dismissed, wings of mansions were closed off, and rooms once filled with life sat dark and unused. Some families attempted to adapt, opening their homes for events or dividing them into smaller residences. Others resisted change, hoping for a return to better days that never came. Over time, the illusion of endless wealth dissolved. What remained were enormous houses built for a financial reality that no longer existed. Economic crashes, rising taxes, and shifting fortunes revealed a truth the Gilded Age had tried to ignore. Wealth could vanish faster than it was created, and stone walls offered no protection against the movement of history. As the 20th century approached, America itself began to change in ways the great estates were never designed to survive. The society that had celebrated size, display, and rigid hierarchy slowly shifted toward speed, efficiency, and mobility. What once symbolized success began to feel outdated, even burdensome. The mansions did not change, but the world around them did, and that difference proved fatal. Cities expanded upward instead of outward. Apartments, hotels, and townhouses became symbols of modern living, offering comfort without isolation. Wealthy families found themselves drawn closer to business centers, cultural institutions, and social life that no longer revolved around private estates. long carriage rides from country mansions felt inconvenient in an age that valued time and accessibility. The mansion, once a statement of power, became a barrier between its owners and the modern world. Family structures were shifting as well. Households grew smaller, and extended families rarely lived together under one roof. Children moved away for education and careers, often settling in different cities or countries. The vast rooms that once hosted generations now stood empty, echoing with absence. A house built for dozens of people made little sense for a couple or a single heir, yet downsizing felt like an admission of failure. The servant system that sustained mansion life also began to collapse. Domestic service lost its appeal as factory jobs, offices, and later professional careers offered better wages and independence. Labor laws improved working conditions, making round-the-clock household staffing both difficult and expensive. Without armies of servants, the daily operation of these homes became impossible. Luxury that depended on invisible labor could not survive in a society where that labor had alternatives. Cultural values changed just as dramatically. Public attitudes turned against excess, especially after economic hardship and war. Lavish living began to appear wasteful, even offensive, in a nation increasingly aware of inequality. Social admiration shifted from display to productivity, from inherited wealth to personal achievement. The grand mansion, once admired, became a symbol of an older, less admirable era. Technology reshaped expectations of comfort. Central heating, electricity, and plumbing transformed ordinary homes, narrowing the gap between elite and middle-class living. Smaller houses could now offer warmth, light, and convenience without massive staffs or endless rooms. The practical advantages of mansions disappeared, leaving only their cost and complexity behind. Transportation also altered daily life. Automobiles replaced carriages, shrinking distances and redefining desirable locations. Wealth no longer required a fortress, like a state, to assert status. Influence could be exercised from offices, clubs, and public institutions rather than private ballrooms. Power became mobile, while the mansion remained fixed. In this changing society, the great estates felt increasingly out of place. They belonged to a rhythm of life that no longer existed, built for a culture that had moved on. What had once been perfect expressions of American ambition became relics, too large, too expensive, and too tied to values that the nation had quietly left behind. Abandonment rarely happened all at once. It arrived quietly, room by room, decision by decision. A family might stop using an entire wing of the house to save on heating costs, then close off another floor, until only a handful of rooms remained lived in. The rest of the mansion sat in darkness, furniture covered in sheets, clocks frozen at the hour they were last wound. The house was still standing, but life inside it was slowly withdrawing. Neglect followed naturally. Repairs were postponed, then forgotten. A small leak in the roof went unattended, allowing water to seep into ceilings and walls. Plaster cracked, paint peeled, and wallpaper loosened at the edges. What once would have been fixed immediately now felt unnecessary, even wasteful. The mansion began to age unevenly, its decay hidden at first, then increasingly impossible to ignore. Without constant care, nature reclaimed space quickly. Vines crept up stone walls, forcing themselves into cracks. Trees grew too close to foundations, their roots shifting floors and walls. Gardens once trimmed daily turned wild. Paths disappeared beneath weeds, and fountains dried up. The carefully controlled landscapes that had symbolized wealth dissolved back into untamed land, indifferent to the grandeur they replaced. Inside, dust accumulated thickly on polished surfaces. Moisture warped wooden floors and rotted beams. Mice, birds, and insects moved into rooms once reserved for guests of honor. Chandeliers sagged under their own weight, and fireplaces filled with debris. The separation between elegance and ruin grew thin, sometimes collapsing in a single storm or harsh winter. Human presence faded as well. Servants were gone, owners rarely visited, and caretakers, if any remained, could not keep up with the scale of deterioration. When a mansion stands empty, it becomes vulnerable. Windows were broken by weather or trespassers. Valuable fixtures were stolen or stripped for resale. Each loss made the building harder to restore, pushing it further into decline. Time worked relentlessly. Freeze and thaw cycles cracked stone. Iron rusted, swelling and splitting the materials around it. Roofs collapsed under snow, bringing entire rooms down with them. Once structural damage began, decay accelerated. What had taken years to build unraveled in silence, with no audience and no ceremony. Eventually, abandonment became complete. The mansion stopped being a home and became a shell. Local residents passed it daily, watching it change with the seasons, green in summer, skeletal in winter. Stories replaced memories. The house that once hosted wealth and ambition now existed as a warning. Its physical decay, mirroring the collapse of the world that created it. Standing before the ruins of a Gilded Age mansion, it becomes impossible to ignore the contrast between intention and outcome. These structures were built to last, designed as declarations of power meant to outlive their creators. Thick stone walls, iron beams, and towering facades were chosen not only for beauty, but for the promise of permanence. Yet the silence inside these ruins tells a different story, one that wealth itself cannot escape. The decay exposes how fragile power truly is. At their height, the families who built these mansions controlled industries, influenced governments, and shaped the economy. Their decisions affected millions of lives, and yet their power proved temporary. The crumbling staircases and collapsed roofs reveal that dominance, no matter how absolute it appears, depends on circumstances that can vanish. Markets shift, societies change, and authority dissolves, leaving behind only physical reminders stripped of meaning. Wealth, once thought to be solid and self-sustaining, is revealed as fluid and vulnerable. These ruins show that money alone cannot guarantee continuity. It requires constant renewal, adaptation, and relevance. When wealth stops moving with the world, it hardens into something brittle. The mansions, frozen in an outdated vision of success, embody what happens when riches become disconnected from reality. There is also a quiet lesson in scale. The sheer size of these homes, once a symbol of triumph, now emphasizes absence. Vast rooms sit empty, magnifying loneliness rather than importance. What was built to impress crowds now stands without witnesses. The ambition to be remembered is undermined by neglect, as names carved into stone fade, and identities dissolve into anonymity. The ruins also reveal how deeply power depends on people. These houses required labor, attention, and belief to survive. When those were withdrawn, when families left, servants disappeared, and society moved on, the structures lost their purpose. Power without participation collapses. Authority without relevance becomes decay. Time plays the final role. It does not rush or announce itself, but it never stops. The slow erosion of stone and wood mirrors the erosion of memory. Generations pass, values change, and what once felt essential becomes incomprehensible. The mansions endure just long enough to remind us that even the most confident visions of the future are temporary. In the end, these ruins speak not of failure alone, but of human limitation. They show how deeply people want to make success permanent, to carve achievement into the landscape itself. And yet, they also reveal a truth that cannot be built away. Wealth fades, power shifts, and permanence is an illusion. What remains is not dominance, but evidence, a quiet, broken reminder of how quickly certainty can turn to dust. As the sun sinks behind these empty walls, the mansions seem to breathe one last time. Light slips through shattered windows and settles on cracked floors, where music once echoed and voices once competed to be remembered. Nothing announces the end, no collapse, no final moment of drama. Just silence, patient and complete. These houses were built to defeat time, to stand as proof that success could be made permanent. Instead, they now serve as witnesses. They remind us that power is loud only for a moment, that wealth shines brightest just before it fades, and that even the grandest dreams eventually loosen their grip on the world. What remains is not the fortune, not the name, but the lesson carved into stone and decay. History does not remember who owned the mansion. It remembers how quickly it was left behind.